Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're zooming out, way out, to embark on a massive geographical journey. We're going to completely map out the Americas, North, Central, and South. But we aren't just going to look at standard borders and mountain ranges. We're actually going to uncover how a monumental historical blunder, literally an absolute accident of navigation, entirely shaped our modern understanding of these continents. As you'll see, one man's mistaken coordinates permanently named indigenous peoples, islands, and entire regions.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with that great historical mistake, see exactly how it named the New World, and then look at the actual macro-level continental structure. After that, we'll break down North America and its islands, take a journey down through South America, and finally, pit the extreme geographical features of the North and the South right against each other.
All right, Section 1, the great historical mistake. And yeah, it all starts with Christopher Columbus.
Now, you probably know he wasn't actually setting out to find a brand new continent, right? Back in Europe, merchants heavily relied on trade with India and Asia, but the overland routes were just incredibly tedious. We're talking constant loading, unloading, and heavy taxes. Columbus wanted a direct sea route to India, so he departs Europe with this wild, bold theory. If he just sails west across the vast Atlantic Ocean, he'll wrap around the globe and hit the East Indies. He makes the grueling voyage and eventually spots land in what we now know as the Bahamas and the Caribbean. And here is the monumental blunder. Upon arrival, Columbus was absolutely convinced he had successfully reached India. He literally had no idea an entirely distinct massive landmass was blocking his path.
Moving on to Section 2, naming the New World. Let's look at the lasting misnomers born directly from that blunder.
You hear the term West Indies all the time, right? Especially in sports like cricket. But why West? Well, because the actual Asian islands Columbus was desperately looking for were known as the East Indies. Since he sailed west across the Atlantic and firmly believed he'd hit those same Asian islands, European mapmakers just started calling this newly discovered Caribbean region the West Indies, basically just to differentiate them from the East Indies. Think about that. An entire region got its name off a massive navigational error.
And, the naming errors absolutely didn't stop with the geography. Because Columbus was so convinced he was in India, he naturally just assumed the indigenous populations he met were Indians. This birthed the historical misnomer Red Indians, a label completely disconnected from the actual rich heritage of the native peoples. And, ironically, the continents themselves wouldn't even bear the name of the man who supposedly discovered them. It was a completely different explorer, Amerigo Vespucci, whose name was eventually adapted by mapmakers to label the entire landmass America.
Okay, Section 3. The continental structure. Time to actually map out these massive landmasses.
The absolute magic number you need to remember here is 35. If you look across the entire expanse of the North and South American landmasses, plus all their surrounding islands, there are exactly 35 fully independent nations. Grasping this number is really the best way to start mentally organizing the geography of this whole side of the world.
So how are those 35 countries split up? Well, the broader North American region is surprisingly dense. It packs in 23 independent countries. But in stark contrast, you look at the massive landmass of South America, and it contains only 12 independent countries. The North has this really tight clustering of smaller nations, while the South is defined by fewer, much larger nations. Let's zoom in and break down that dense northern region first.
That brings us to Section 4, North America and Islands. It's a surprisingly complex piece of geography. To make keeping track of those 23 northern countries a bit easier, let's break them down into 3 distinct buckets. First up, we have the North American mainland, which consists of just 3 massive countries: Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Sitting right below that, acting like a geographic land bridge, is Central America, which holds 7 countries, including places like Costa Rica, Panama, and Honduras. And finally, we have the West Indies, or the Caribbean, which contains a surprising 13 distinct island nations, like Cuba. So 3 plus 7 plus 13, boom, there are your 23 northern countries.
Actually, before we leave the North, I have to point out this really fascinating geographical anomaly, Greenland. Geographically, it is undeniably sitting right there on the North American continental shelf. It's part of North America. However, politically and culturally, it's owned by Denmark. It is a perfect textbook example of how our political maps don't always match up with geographical reality.
All right, Section 5, Journey to South America. Let's head down and look at the giants of the South.
So down here, we've got those 12 independent countries.
absolute geographic giants like Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. But there is a tiny catch on the map, French Guiana. It sits right there in South America, sure, but it's not an independent country. It's literally an overseas department of France. We also see some really cool naming history down here. Take Ecuador, for example. It sits exactly on the planet's equatorial line, and the name literally translates to Ecuador. And culturally, this region absolutely dominates global football. Nations like Brazil and Argentina aren't just participants, they are legendary World Cup champions, weaving the sport directly into the DNA of the continent.
And finally, Section 6, North versus South Extremes. Time to compare these geographical titans.
Let's start with the literal backbones of these continents. In the north, the absolute champion is the massive Mississippi-Missouri River system. It's a vital economic artery cutting right through the center of the continent. Down south, obviously the mighty Amazon River is incredibly important and dominates its basin. But the true defining structural backbone of that continent is actually the massive Andean mountain range. The Andes literally dictate the flow of almost everything else on the continent, including exactly where the Amazon's tributaries even begin.
Okay, what about altitude? If you want to stand on the highest point in North America, you have to brave the freezing temperatures of Alaska to summit Mount Denali. But South America? It raises the bar even higher with Mount Aconcagua. Located in Argentina, Aconcagua isn't just the highest peak in South America, it is literally the tallest mountain in the entire world outside of the Himalayas. Just think about the sheer scale of that for a second. Let's go the exact opposite direction, straight down. In North America, the floor absolutely drops out at the famous Death Valley in the United States, a notoriously hot, arid desert basin. Contrast that with South America's lowest point, the Valdez Peninsula in Argentina. It's this stark coastal depression that contrasts wildly with those towering peaks we just talked about. And speaking of the Andes, South America just casually holds a few more world records that are simply too incredible to ignore. The Andes Mountains themselves form the longest continuous continental mountain range on Earth. Over in Venezuela, you'll find Angel Falls, which is the undisputed highest uninterrupted waterfall on the planet. And sitting way up high in the Andes is Lake Titicaca, holding the proud title of the highest navigable lake in the world. We have covered a staggering amount of ground in this explainer today, from the 23 varied nations of the North to the 12 massive countries of the South. And it's wild to think how much of our modern terminology stems from one historic, messy voyage. I really want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. We saw how Columbus's sheer stubbornness gave us terms like the West Indies and Red Indians. If he had modern navigation, if he knew exactly where he was landing, how differently would the map of the Americas be drawn today? What names would have been lost, and what names would have been born? Think about that the next time you look at a globe. Thanks for learning with us today.